This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'll be talking about one of my favorite topics, mental load or emotional labor. Before I get to that, please do subscribe if I don't offend you too much with this upcoming episode, which honestly is in line with all my other stuff. So probably it will not be so surprising how I feel or surprising at all. But either way, do subscribe if you enjoy listening to me for $8.99 a month. You get access to probably over 200 extra episodes by now. And the most recent was the random couple reframe, how to gain objectivity about your belief system by picturing your parents as a random couple, which is actually not as kooky as it sounds and can be massively helpful. So if you're interested in that and many others, including, of course, oral sex on women, which is why 90% of you subscribe, then click the subscribe link in the episode description. Okay, so mental load, emotional labor, all of this stuff. I used to do so much more stuff about this. One of my funniest episodes, I think, was the one where I read through the Fair Play book, and that was one of my longest episodes because it was so funny to me. And you could go back and look up Fair Play. You could put that into the Spotify search bar for these for the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Now, listen, I'm not saying there's not a mental load, but the way that this is treated on social media, it's obvious anxiety for many. And you see that as a psychologist. And it's like, as a psychologist, don't go into this career if you really just want to be able to watch TV and relax, because you can't. Because, you can. It's more fun, honestly, I think, to see the deeper level. But you diagnose everybody. So it's like all the people on reality TV are pretty much borderline or narcissistic because they're screaming and yelling about how important they are and how offended they are by each other in public. And they have families and they're just, just putting it all out there in a very dramatic, histrionic, self-involved style, which is generally, a cluster B personality disorder, which is borderline narcissistic or histrionic personality disorders, right? And I'm not diagnosing anybody individually, of course, but you see these traits, kind of like X-ray vision, when you work with enough people who struggle with these issues. And the same thing for depression and the same thing for addiction. Another one, by the way, that's big with reality TV is untreated substance abuse. How does everybody get to be yelling all the time? Because they're drunk, But that really exacerbates their problems. And that's why they give them unlimited drinks at all these, in these reality TV shows, and some memoirs about people who've been on The Bachelor or Bachelorette talk about this. There's just, the alcohol is flowing because that's when they know the drama will happen. And for people who struggle with substance abuse, this is real tough, So anyway, point is, a lot of these mental load videos seem to be straight up generalized anxiety, This idea that you have to do every little thing exactly perfectly is literally, if you went to a therapist and you said that, you would be working on not thinking that anymore. You wouldn't be working on how to make your husband do it. To some degree, at some level, certainly, and you got to do the laundry, for example. But for somebody who says you got to separate out the laundry, you got to do it this way and that way, and if he doesn't do it exactly my way, then he's being, hurtful and unfair, and that means that I have to take it over, and I also have to think about how to tell him to take it over. This stuff is straight up anxiety, And so if the way to check if your problem with your partner is that they don't share the mental load, go to a couples therapist, right? Because that person should be able to say, your partner does nothing, or, and they need to work on it, and likely they have ADHD and no executive function, and that's fucking annoying, right? And, or they would say probably Anne, because I talk about this all the time, by the way, that the ADHD guy pairs with the anxious woman, and you struggle with untreated anxiety. And everything doesn't have to be done at the level that you think. And some of this stuff doesn't have to be done at all. Right? So when you are depressed, and I have a whole podcast about this, you struggle with decision fatigue. So it isn't really healthy that when somebody asks, what can I do to help you? You take that offensively as another thing they are putting on your plate. Now, if somebody's following you around like in a cartoon or something, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And acting like they're new to this planet and they just dropped from Mars, then sure, you got a leg to stand on. But there's a lot of gray area here where there are women who are super depressed. And I get it. I've struggled with depression my whole life, and I get this. And if you're depressed, making a decision feels very bad. It feels paralyzing, and instead of looking inward and saying, why is it hard for me to say, yes, please do this thing? Why is that so hard for me on my end? It isn't just their fault. There's two people, as I have right in the description of this podcast. It takes two to tango. Marriage problems are 50-50. So when somebody is feeling like telling their partner, for example, I'll give you an example. So this, I watched a video where the woman was saying that signing up her husband for the book fair is difficult. And so that's the mental load. And even if he volunteers at the book fair, then, that's not enough because he didn't sign himself up for the book fair. So basically the woman who signs him up for the book fair, despite that he's at the book fair for a few hours, the woman who does the book fair, that's for the real mental load. Listen, I mean, then how can you get higher at a job? As you get higher at a job, right, then you have to make decisions. You have to manage, In many, many families, if he would have picked a time for the book fair, it wouldn't have been the right time, And so when somebody is anxious, and you tend to be an anxious and depressed person if you feel like making decisions is very hard. People who do not struggle with anxiety and depression find decision-making to be easy and autonomous and agency. It's think about kids, like a teenager that's very, very anxious about the decisions they would have to make as an adult and making the wrong decision. We would say, oh, that person is anxious. An anxious teenager would think more that way, whereas a teenager that does not struggle with anxiety would say, it'll be great to make decisions. I love to choose where I eat. I will love to choose how my house looks. I will love to choose what car I get. I will love to choose what to do with the money that I earn instead of being a child, that doesn't get to choose. And so many of us parents say to the child, well, for now, I choose XYZ, but when you're 18, you, for example, can choose, where you live or whatever, what you eat and what have you. I make dinner now, but of course, when you're an adult, then you make dinner. And for a child, imagine a child turning to you and saying, but I won't know what to cook for dinner. You would know that child was anxious. You would know that child was struggling in some way. Not if they just said it once, how will I know? And then you would say, well, here's how I pick. But a child who repeatedly said and made this a frame of things that they repeatedly said is that they wouldn't be able to deal with the, quote, mental load of making themselves dinner and choosing what to do and perhaps doing that for a family. That would be pretty obvious that child struggled with anxiety, to not see that as an opportunity. For self-expression, you can make choices. So it's I always make the analogy, a woman would never say to her friends, some people say this and they get made fun of, right? But, it's so hard to tell my housekeeper what to do. It's the world's tiniest violin is so hard. Oh my God, so hard to tell your housekeeper what to do. Come on, be happy you have a housekeeper. Somebody's helping you. Somebody's doing stuff that you don't want to do. So this should be considered, wow, that's so great. What I get to do is to tell somebody what to do. That's what I do? That's great. I'm at the top of the anthill there, like a CEO. I am, the CEO is the person who tells people what to do. They don't complain about that. They may complain in a little bit. I have worked with lots of CEOs. But what I never have heard a CEO say in my office is, man, I wish I was the person that was being told what to do. Now in bed, as you see from TV shows like Mad Men or Billions, some of them do like to be told what to do, and somehow they relate that to, that they make decisions all day. And plenty of women feel the same, by the way. Some people like to be submissive in bed when they make all the decisions all day. That's its own thing. That's kind of like just a power, somebody who likes to focus on power dynamics. But that's a tangent. But the point being that if you think it's completely aversive to both decide what needs to be done, then tell somebody what to do and then they do it, well, you're not going to have a lot of sympathy, because there's people who are in a totally different position, where they don't have anybody to do the stuff that they tell to do. And like in a house, for example, if you didn't have a housekeeper, generally your life would be thought to be harder than if you had a housekeeper, even though everybody knows you got to tell the housekeeper what to do. Right? So point being is that two things. First of all, if the mental load is that arduous, you've got to look in and say, why am I depressed and anxious? Why? Semicolon, am I depressed and anxious? So, or that wasn't the right grammar. Why? Question mark. Am I depressed and anxious? And that is what makes these decisions feel so burdensome. Or, as I discussed frequently, am I unhappy? Am I unhappy in my marriage overall? And this is a socially condoned way to say that I am, and to have everybody else complain about my partner. Because I'll tell you, and I say this all the time, what would your housework standards be if you felt more loved? Because let's say a woman I'm going to give an example. Her husband makes $100,000, right? And she makes $75,000. And this goes along with kind of the averages, I think, women make a little less. And so, although of course not all the time, I'm a primary breadwinner. I work with many women who are primary breadwinners, but it's changing. And then she says, I really want to send Joey, our child, to private school because Joey is twice exceptional and Joey is not flourishing in his current environment. And husband says, well, I think Joey should stay at public. And she says, well, Joey is my special light in the darkness. He's such a wonderful boy. And I really think that, this private school that I found is going to make all the difference in Joey. And he says, well, listen, man, I'm going to have to take more time at work then. I'm in sales and I am going to have to really bust my ass if you want me to make another extra $20,000 after taxes that we're going to give to Joey's special school. And she says, oh, thank you. This is so wonderful. Thank you for listening to me. Hopefully she says that. If she's in a good marriage, he's doing what she wants, right? So guess what? He's not going to be able to do as much of the shit at home. But many women in that situation are going to feel loved and respected and heard by their husband. And therefore, they understand. He's got to pound the pavement a little bit more because I want Joey to go to a special school. And it wasn't his idea. He wasn't even on board. But as a good student of John Gottman, John Gottman, by the way, was divorced twice before he met his Julie Gottman, who he makes all the books with. I'm going to talk about that in another podcast, probably tomorrow, about divorce x-ray vision. When you're divorced, so you could see that everybody that's going to get divorced. I think that's the method to his madness, not all these four horsemen, but he's literally been divorced enough that he can see as the people walk into the room without, then maybe did a post hoc theory. Of course, I'm kidding. John Gottman's great. I've certainly never met him. He's wonderful and brilliant, but I just thought it was funny because of the divorce x-ray vision concept, which I'll discuss in my next podcast. But anywho, John Gottman says that something important for men to do in a happy marriage is to accept influence, which every woman knows. No woman's ever surprised by that one in session. Men are surprised. They're like, I thought she wants an alpha male. And I'm like, have you not followed my social media? What every woman wants is a man who listens and who respects her position and who says, you know what, now that I think about it, little Joey does deserve the best education possible, targeted to his individualized learning style, And so when this man is out of the house making more money for little Joey to go to school, guess what? She's not going to be complaining the same way about the more chores that she has to do. Because she's going to be doing it thinking, here we are both pitching in. We're on the same team. We both love this family. We value each other. He valued my perspective. Look at Joey. He's thriving. Look at the diorama he just made. Never would have done that in his previous school. And, whatever. So point is that if you feel different and you feel loved and respected by your partner, all of a sudden, for people who are not depressed and anxious, the mental load stuff is thought of much differently. So think about it. Do you just not feel loved and respected by your partner? And a real low-hanging fruit in our society is to claim that he doesn't split the mental load. Now, listen, being married to somebody with ADHD is no picnic. I talk about that all the time. People that come in who have ADHD partners struggle. I even have a podcast called Think Real Hard Before You Marry a Guy with ADHD. So I know I have something all about ADHD when your husband has ADHD, because most of the people I see, the man does and the woman is anxious. I even did a seminar about an anxious wife paired with an ADHD husband, because that is, and I have that thing as a podcast too, because it's so common when I see it. And so that's hard. But there's guys with ADHD that are trying, and they're trying and they say basically, I cannot manage all the things you can manage. You are amazing. Please tell me what to do and I will do all those things. But I have no executive functioning, pretty much, And at work, I fuck up all the time, honestly, in that regard. And I am the man on the ground and the man who's good in a crisis, but I am not the man who's good at planning ahead and at doing boring shit anywhere. And I can work on it, but please give me the grace to just tell me what you need. And you know what? Women who feel like the guy's really owning their problems like that, and that he puts her in this exalted position like, wow, you're awesome. I can't do what you do. Those women are happier to split the mental load, especially if that means, and it does so much, that they do less. That's like the big secret in a lot of these families, is that the guy's doing more actual labor. And I talk about this in multiple podcasts. This is not all families. Obviously, statistics show that women do more housework and childcare overall. Still, not by as much as you think. It's like 5 hours a week, and men work 5 hours a week more. So that kind of evens out on averages. But the point is in some families, she's sitting there on the phone saying, I'm doing all this macro level stuff for the family and I'm registering them for camp 8 months in advance. And then it has to be the best camp in the world. So it's going to take 30 man hours of decision making. That's depression. If you cannot get off the couch, or anxiety, if you can't get off the couch, you're glued to your phone, your husband's doing bedtime, bath time, dinner time all the time, and you're basically on your phone, you're telling yourself, and I have empathy truly, and you're telling yourself to resolve the cognitive dissonance of why you're not getting up. You're saying that you're doing macro level mental load management. And then instead of saying thank you to your husband for doing all this other shit, you're saying actually he's not doing enough. Because if you don't say it like that, then it's like, it's too painful to say, man, why aren't I doing more? Well, then that's kind of something that needs to be explored, right? In couples counseling and individual therapy. Because if you are telling yourself that sitting down on the phone is pretty much all that you can do. And then, if it is, and you're very depressed, and I have so much on depression podcast posts, and you're trying to get your depression treated, which of course not all of it can be treated. Some of it's treatment resistant. But in that case, at least your marriage doesn't have to suffer. And you could say, this is a wonderful setup I got here, and he does all the stuff on the ground and I can sit down and get all the rest that I need. It doesn't have to necessarily be like, here I am encumbered by the mental load. It could be that that's a way to say that you're useful when you don't feel useful because you're struggling with depression. You can't get up. You don't have the energy that you know that you could or used to or should in your mind have. So sometimes this is somebody who cannot accept or own their depression or anxiety, and it's coupled by a man who's an enabler that had a depressed, anxious, or addicted mother. And what they're used to is the emperor's new clothes style of the man does everything in the house, but he always gets kind of reprimanded and scolded. The woman does nothing, but somehow she's still in the power seat. And both of the partners are more happy this way than if they said that he actually does everything and she struggles real bad with her mental health. Nobody's allowed to say that. That's that makes the man seem somehow better. And so men who struggle with self-esteem get themselves into these situations where they partner with a woman who struggles with her mental health, just like their mother did, or possibly their father. Doesn't have to be along gender lines, as I always say. And then they come in and do everything but get reprimanded for not doing more. And so if that's the case that you're in, that's not a mental load scenario. That's an undiagnosed anxiety, a codependency scenario. You know, that would be like a woman getting drunk every night, being hungover the next day, and reprimanding him for not doing the children's morning routine successfully when she's not even ever awake for morning routine. That's just classic codependency, one addict and one enabler. And with untreated anxiety and depression, it can be much the same thing, except that now because we have smartphones, then she could sit on her phone and say that I'm doing all this extra labor and mental load and signing you up for the book fair. And then nobody ever says, why aren't you going to the book fair? It's like the question can't be asked is an Emperor's New Clothes scenario. So instead, she says that the 2 minutes of signing him up, literally 2 minutes, and the reading the school emails, which she may do more attentively than usual because she's not doing anything else and or because she's super anxious, because you don't have to read all that shit, you know? I mean, they really will follow up, you know, and you're like, they will, you know? And the point is that the people who know every single word of these emails, that's not because they're a better parent than the other parent. That's because they're the anxious parent. And you know what? The other parent might read it, unless he has massive ADHD, in which I told you how the healthier dynamic is for him to admit that and thank her for her part and her to admit her part and thank him for his part, like always, to appreciate each other. But, you know, in situations where the woman is depressed/anxious and the guy does not have ADHD and he's the one up and doing stuff, well, maybe, you know, the reason that he doesn't read those emails is because he's busting his ass between his paid job and the open secret that they can never disclose that he does the majority of the stuff in the home. And I have a podcast specifically about this called Are There Really Men Who Do Everything? When I talk about how this is pretty much a big secret, you know, where the man does everything in the house, and it is because the woman is addicted, depressed, or anxious, but they can't tell anybody. So it's almost like they do this fake, it's almost like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf style, like shared folie à deux delusion, and they tell it to other people that she's basically the macro level CEO and he's just the doofy hands on the ground, but they both know that he's doing a shit ton more stuff than her. They're not allowed to say it because nobody's allowed to tell her that she struggles with her mental health. And if that's the scenario that you're in, then you got to get into therapy, and you may need to get into individual therapy first to kind of clarify what's going on in your head before you even go into couples therapy, because I've also seen couples waste their time in couples therapy for months and months before they finally tell me what's actually going on, which is that, you know, basically she goes to bed at 4 p.m. and he takes over after that, or some equivalent. So, and of course, men struggle with depression too, goes without saying, lower rates than women, but they still do. They also have higher rates of substance abuse, although that's catching up. And there's plenty of men who go to bed at 4 p.m., but I never yet heard a woman who won't tell me that. But of course, definitionally, I wouldn't know, you know, if they actually took that secret through all of couples counseling and to the grave. But I will tell you that in our current, you know, sociological climate, women complain about what men don't do in the house a lot more than men complain about what women don't do in the house. So that's kind of my point, is to interrogate that. Don't just take the sociological trope and run with it, but say what's going on in my individual situation. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. It's longer than usual because I do love this topic, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.